Hey, it's Mosquito, also known as Chris. Welcome to the shop. Today, we're going to take a look at this. This is a Stanley number 50, which is equipped with a Loon Lake Toolworks Kerfing plane kit. Kit itself comes with a saw blade, a backing plate, and a longer depth stop. $85, at least as the time of recording the video, and shipping to Minnesota cost me $7.77, I guess. So saw blade itself is made out of 1095 spring steel, just like most modern saw blades are, and then stainless steel was used for the depth stop, and then there's a backing plate that goes in between kind of the middle section and the saw blade itself. That is also stainless steel. It was around, I think, 10-ish years ago, probably around 2013, 2014. Guy by the name of Tom Fidgen of the Unplugged Workshop pioneered and sort of proliferated the idea of these kerfing planes. He released a couple of videos of making a kerfing plane that he used along with a frame saw, and that was just a way for him to be able to resaw lumber by hand. So whether you're gonna resaw it this way, you know, make thinner pieces from some thicker stock, or if you're just gonna rip it and wanted that. He was fairly popular back then. He made a lot more videos back then. He makes video on YouTube, but kind of hasn't done a whole lot in the last couple of years. But anyway, naturally, his popularity sort of sparked an explosion in the prevalence of the kerfing planes around the rising tide of hand tool masochists. Woodworkers, hand tool woodworkers. Disclosure, I spent several years pretty much as an exclusively hand tool woodworker prior to having a shop that was a little more conducive to facilitating and having power tools. I worked out of a spare bedroom in an apartment and a spare bedroom in a rental house. I'm no expert in hand tools, but I've been there. So there's no implications of snobbery or anti-hand tool rhetoric, anything perfectly fine by me. I'm just poking fun at it because I've been there. Fast forward a little ways, there's been a lot of people that have been trying to come up with some ideas and making their own, but Bob Page over at Loon Lake Toolworks, obviously not the first person to come up with the idea. A few different places that manufacture either kits or planes, along with the frame saws. There's also been plenty of people that have either made their own from modifying back saws or from repurposing old saw blades, getting new saw blades and making their own, you name it. I've seen a bunch of them. This one in particular is pretty easy. It just adapts a Stanley number 50 plow plane into a kerfing plane, and it requires no permanent modifications to the plane. All you have to do is take some of the parts off of the plane and then reassemble it with the kit. It does only work with the Stanley number 50s. It shouldn't matter if it's made in the US or made in England, but it does matter that it's a Stanley number 50, a record number 50. While the parts do fit on the rods the way that they need to, it just, too many things on the main casting there, just it doesn't sit flush on the way that it needs to. Same goes for the record 044. Similar situation, fits over the rods where it needs to, but all the stuff that holds the blade in place doesn't work. Stanley number 45, number 55. Whoa, that wasn't tight. The rods are spaced out too far, and there's just a bunch of stuff that makes it so that it won't sit flush. Again, doesn't work for it. Wasn't supposed to. Designed, made for the 50. So that's what it works with. I was on the notification list so that when they were back in stock, I would know about it. And when I got that email, I picked it up. I did not receive it for free. I am not getting paid to make the video. Bob doesn't know I'm making the video, has no say in it, and most likely has no idea who I am or any real probability of ever even seeing the video. Just getting that out of the way. Now that we know what it is, let's dive into actually what the heck do we do with it, how do we use it, and whether or not I like it. All right, so this is the kit. The saw plate, so that is specially made specifically for the Stanley number 50. You've got the backing plate, basically the same design as the saw plate, just without the teeth and a little bit thicker. And then you've got the depth stop. And technically there's nothing that stops you from using the depth stop that comes with the plane, but this one's a little bit bigger, and we'll get into that in a sec. You get about 5 pages worth of instructions. What it boils down to is basically you take everything off the plane except the rods. So if you have this style with the wooden handle, then what you need to do is you have this little adjustment for the depth of cut, and you just have to take that off. So there's that little thing right up underneath the head of the screw, and that actually fits through this thing, and sort of you tighten down on that bushing, and then the adjustment can still move. And you want to make sure that you don't lose that, because, well, that would suck. You want to make sure you keep that together. So I put that back together, and now we are ready to look at the rest of the plane. First thing that goes on is the saw plate, backing plate, and that goes on next. After that, we put that sliding skate section on, and you want to make sure that this parallel adjustment is screwed out enough that it's not poking through on this side. You can see here, if I were to adjust this over, it sticks out, and you don't want to do that because this is going to ride against the backing plate. So just back it out enough that it's not going to make any contact. It wouldn't matter too much if it did, because you're not going to damage it or anything. It's just that once you install this in place, you tighten it down, and you want the whole thing to tighten against the backing plate rather than just that little point in the back. So just make sure that it's pulled out a little ways. And then you put your washer on, and then that wing nut. Then you put your fence back on, and then that is how you adjust how far in you want that to be. So depending on how wide of a piece you want to cut, that was how you would set that. So here we've got the original depth stop for the plane, and then this is the one that comes supplied with the kit. You can see the size difference. The one that comes with the kit is significantly longer, and that is to give it just a little bit more reach. You can get away with using the original one. That's what I was doing earlier, because I actually had to file this one down to fit my plane, because it was just a little bit too wide, and so it was contacting the main body and wouldn't actually go all the way up. So you can get the job done with the original one, but it does come with a stainless steel version. And what I'm actually going to do is install it, I guess, backwards for what the instructions say. So in the instruction sheet, it'll show it going in that way. The reason that I'm going to do it this way is because then when you're starting at the front, you actually have something that can engage that depth before you have to get about that far into the plane. So I'm going to put it on quote unquote backwards. And yes, I know that that's not how the instructions say you're supposed to do it, but that's the way I want to do it. All right, so that is our plane all set up. And then all you need to do is start using it to cut a curve. So the key thing to remember with this is, although it looks, feels, kind of behaves like a plane, it's a saw. This is a saw blade, not an iron. Why is that important? Well, if you've ever taken a saw, starting your cut, nice and easy. However, if you push down on your saw, oh, there's that bite. So that's kind of the thing you need to remember about this. This is a lot of engagement. That's a lot of teeth. So if you put it on here and then go like you would with a normal plane, it's really hard. And even if you can get it, it'll want to chatter. I'll actually modify my grip. Normally I would grab the hand plane like this, but with this I kind of lower, and I mainly just push with the heel of my hand along the bottom of the tote. That gets a much more linear motion rather than having more downward force. So for example, if I was going to be grabbing a handsaw, if you see that angle versus when I choke down and use the heel, it's pretty much the same. I start at the far end, kind of a light cut, and make sure your fence is engaged, and just kind of cut away. Now I admit, normally if I was going to be doing a lot of this, I'd be doing it at the other bench, but the other bench is that. So this one has a little bit of wobble because it's not so much designed for this motion, it's designed for front to back, but glossing over that. And then eventually you will work your way down to your depth stop. I said I'd come back to this, but this is why I put that in as the directions say backwards. Because when I start up there, then I can actually have that depth stop engaged. See, right there, I'm barely even into the cut and the depth stop is already engaging on my workpiece. So that is why I have that in backwards. What you do is you do the long grain, flip it over, same registration face, that's important. And then you do the same thing on the long grain side. After you've done the two long grain sides, then you can do the end grain, and that is so that you don't kind of chip and blow out that end. And basically, same procedure, just a little bit lighter touch. Still starting at the end, working your way back. And then, once you've made your kerf all the way around, what you do is you saw it off. All right, so I'm not gonna lie, that's a lot of work. Also, not quite the same as a frame saw. Yeah. I mentioned earlier, I don't have a frame saw, so you might be thinking, why buy a kerfing plane if you don't have a frame saw? I've also got a bandsaw. So if I was gonna resaw something like that, it would be over there. One of the things that I actually did want this for is making these kind of rabbets. So being able to cut a small rabbet, because one of the things that I like to make are these little boxes. So just a sliding lid box, and for the box lids, a lot of times what I end up doing is just cutting rabbets on both sides and then having sort of a semi-raised panel type sliding lid. Being able to use the kerfing plane to cut those would be kind of fun. So let's see how I do that. So essentially, I would set this up the exact same way as if I was going to be doing what I just did, and I would cut the groove down, or the kerf down the one side. And then once I've cut the kerf on the edge, then you just kind of come over here and cut that on the top. And then I would just come in with a small shoulder plane, just in case there was any little bit to clean up in the corner. Which there was just a little bit. You know, you've got a number 50. Presumably, you've got number 50 plane irons, which I have. Why don't you just cut the rabbet with the plane? Well, you know, quit trying to rain on my parade. Sometimes you just want to try new things and support people that make things, at least for me, in the US. So that was one of the reasons why I actually wanted to get it, is because that kind of thing. The use case that I came up with for pretending like I could justify it for making rabbets for box lids was that now I've got square dowel or rectangular dowel stock that will fit in a groove that I am using for the bottom panels and or those top sliding lids. Get a little bit of extra stock, so a little bit of a economy. I don't know, I'm just making stuff up. All right, so here we're gonna have a little bit of fun. We're gonna use a batten and no fence to see if we can't get something that's a little bit diagonal. We'll see how this works out. So now with the batten removed, we can hopefully follow our groove. So that didn't go perfectly. There's a little bit where it kind of wandered, but who knows why. It's probably my fault, but hey. Now I'm getting the fence set up because I got a couple more that I want to do, and then I'll show you what the plan is once I'm done with that. So obviously this thing is filed for rip, and what I'm doing now is crosscut. So I left myself a little extra down here, so I'm gonna plane off the edge. Sure. So what I've got is a bunch of thin pieces of wood. I've got some Padauk, some Purple Heart, and some walnut. I ran them through the drum sander, got them down to, I think I set it for around 0.6, or sorry, 0.06. That's about the width of the kerf of the kerfing kit. And so those fit in the grooves nicely. And what I'm just doing is kind of filling in those kerfs that I just cut. And then I'm gonna work through, fill them all in, and see what we got. Made a couple of clocks with just basically some stringing. Once again, I just cut some pieces off of some flat stock that I had made, roughly 0.055, 0.06 inches in thickness, and that fits into the kerf. And then just a little bit of shellac, drilled the hole and put in the clock insert. So I don't know, you could do coasters, you could probably use it on a cutting board, serving board, whatever the heck that French sounding word is. That one with the cheese and the meat platter stuff. Charcuterie boards, I know, anyway, that's just another use that I thought of trying to try out. So that is the Loon Lake Toolworks Kerfing Kit on the Stanley number 50 plane. I like it, but I'm also practical. My time in the shop is kind of the most scarce thing at the moment. So am I gonna go and use that for resawing a bunch of stuff? Probably not, because if I'm being honest, I'm not a hand tool purist. I love hand tools, and I do most of my stock prep on machines, and then I come back to the bench, and I love doing all the joinery by hand because that's the part that I enjoy. Doing a bunch of material by hand, not likely to be very high on the list. I have more than one bandsaw, and one of them is specifically set up for ripping and resawing. That's probably what I'm going to use in 99+% of the cases. I might eventually decide, hey, I'm just going to do a project that I want to do 100% hand tool, just because maybe that'll come in handy for that. If you've ever had to try to find a depth stop for a 50, a record 050, or record 044, or an 043, people want a lot of money for those if you can find it. If nothing else, at least you get that. It is well made. It does work pretty well. It cuts around a 32nd of an inch, maybe a little bit more, 3/64 maybe in terms of the kerf width. So it's definitely wide enough for pretty much any saw that you're going to have, whether that's a frame saw or a hand saw, unless you put some wild set on it. But you're not going to want to rip with something with that crazy of a set anyway, because it's going to suck. I am not going to make too many excuses because I actually do enjoy testing out new tools and supporting tool makers that still make things in the US, especially for such a niche hobby such as hand tool woodworking. So that to me is almost worth it, just to kind of perpetuate makers of tools in this modern era. I'm realistic. I understand this isn't going to be for everybody, and to be perfectly honest, I feel like there's a decent chance, if you're the type of person that does a lot of hand tool stuff or is all hand tool, if you wanted to go down the road of having a frame saw to do all of your resawing and ripping, chances are you'd probably fancy the idea of having a dedicated kerfing plane rather than having a plow plane with a kerfing kit on it. If you want it for occasional use, or you don't want to have an extra tool sitting around and you have a plow plane already, or you want to get a plow plane because as a plow plane they're pretty useful, and you want to add the ability to cut kerfs with it, it's a pretty good option. I like it. I think it works pretty well. Once you get used to it, there's a little bit of a tricky kind of balance that you need between pressure and grip and holding the front up. It's something that you'll get used to. Just get out of the mindset of using it as a plane and transition into using it as a saw, and it'll be a much easier transition to using this thing. Anyway, I can't make up your mind for you. I can only say that I like it. I don't know if you'll like it, but it's there, it's out there, and I do think that it is worth the money if that's something that you're looking for. I appreciate those of you that stuck around this far. Hopefully you, if nothing else, learned a little bit about kerfing planes and how you might be able to use them. But I don't know, I kind of like doing these things. So if you have something in mind that you're like, hey, it'd be kind of interesting to see how that thing works, or what do you think about that? Let me know in the comments below. Who knows, maybe I'll decide to go out, pick one up, and do a little review on it within reason, because I do have a budget after all. I am married. So anyway, thanks again for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will catch you in the next one.